Waverly Falls had always been the kind of town where crime felt like a rumor, not a reality. But in May 2018, when 68-year-old widow Margaret Fletcher walked into the police station with a revolver and a tear-stained diary page, she uttered 7 words that would shake the town to its roots. "I think I've killed the wrong man." What followed was a case unlike any other. A tangled web of grief, mistaken identity, buried trauma, and a murder rooted in memories too painful to forget. This is the story of the widow of Waverly Street. Waverly Falls sits just outside the Catskills in upstate New York. It's a postcard town with white picket fences, seasonal parades, and an almost obsessive commitment to normalcy. Margaret Fletcher was one of the town's familiar faces. A retired English teacher who quoted Dickinson from memory and baked enough pies to feed an army. She lost her husband, Arthur, back in 1995. He fell down the stairs in their home. A tragic accident, everyone said. She never remarried, never left. She became the town's quiet matriarch. Gracious, generous, lonely, but never dangerous. That's why when the police arrived at her house and found Leonard Drake dead in her greenhouse, shot in the chest, the town gasped. Lenny was no saint. A handyman with a sketchy past, he moved to Waverly about a year earlier, taking on odd jobs and living above the old hardware store. Some called him rough around the edges. Others just thought he was trying to start over. No one could explain why he ended up dead in a garden of orchids. Margaret's greenhouse was pristine. Shelves of succulents, hanging vines, even a water feature humming softly in the corner. But on May 6th, it became a crime scene. Lenny's body was slumped over a potting table, his blood mixing with soil and shattered clay. He was shot once in the chest at close range, no signs of a struggle. Just one clean, fatal shot. The revolver? An old .38 Smith & Wesson, registered to her late husband. Police noted 2 coffee cups on the workbench. One was untouched, Margaret's. The other had Lenny's fingerprints. There was no break-in, no signs of theft, no anger, just eerie calm. That's when officers found the diary page tucked into Margaret's blouse, and everything changed. The torn page read, "He looked right at me. The same eyes, the same voice, like nothing ever happened. But I remember every single thing." Margaret was taken in for questioning. Her hands trembled. She wasn't confused, she was afraid. Not of the consequences, but of what she believed she had done. "I knew it was him. I saw it in his smirk. He knew me. He remembered." But when detectives asked who he was, she fell silent. Then came the backstory. Margaret believed she had been stalked in the early 1990s. She described strange calls, unlocked doors, items in the house being moved, and a man who would appear outside her window and vanish before police could arrive. Her husband, Arthur, insisted she was imagining things, but Margaret kept detailed notes in journals. She claimed that on a rainy night in March 1995, Arthur chased the man out of the house. Hours later, he was found dead at the base of their stairs. It was ruled an accident. Margaret never believed it. Over the years, she began to convince herself the man responsible for her husband's death and for her own unraveling was still alive. And now, in 2018, he had returned as Leonard Drake. Detective Elena Ramirez had been transferred from Syracuse 6 months earlier. She wasn't from Waverly, and that worked in her favor. She saw what locals didn't want to: inconsistencies, patterns, and buried truths. She started with the diary entries. Dozens of them, spanning years, describing the man in the hallway, the scratching at the door, the voice calling her name from the garden. They weren't delusions. They were consistent, specific, and filled with emotional detail. Digging deeper, Ramirez uncovered an old name, Thomas Riker. In 1991, Riker had been briefly investigated for trespassing and voyeurism in Waverly Falls. No charges. He vanished months later. That same year, The police report showed a suspicious 911 call made from the Fletcher home. No officers were dispatched. Ramirez's team ran background checks. Riker had reappeared in Albany in the late 2000s, under a new name, Leonard Drake. But things weren't that simple. Fingerprint records didn't match. The man Margaret shot was not Thomas Riker. Lenny had a record, nothing violent, just drunk and disorderly, a few unpaid debts. But he'd lived a mostly quiet life. Then Ramirez found something unexpected. In Lenny's apartment was a locked box. Inside, letters, decades old, yellowed with age. They were from Thomas Riker. Riker and Lenny were half-brothers. Lenny had been adopted as a baby and only reconnected with Riker a few years prior. The letters were strange, cryptic messages filled with paranoia. One line chilled the room when Ramirez read it. "I watch her still. The lady in the garden. She never knew what I took from her." It confirmed Margaret Stalker was real. That her memories were not hallucinations, but evidence of a predator who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Riker had been dead for 4 years, killed in a hit-and-run in Connecticut under yet another fake name. Margaret had killed the wrong man. Margaret was charged with second-degree murder. The town was divided. Some saw a deranged old woman who snapped. Others saw a victim finally taking justice into her own hands. Her defense team, led by psychologist Dr. Ethan Lowe, argued for diminished responsibility. Margaret, he claimed, was suffering from re-triggered PTSD, her mind trapped in a feedback loop of unresolved trauma. She didn't kill out of rage, Lowe explained. She killed out of fear, misplaced, but very real. Witnesses from the community told stories of her kindness, her quiet sorrow, her slow withdrawal from public life. Ramirez testified too, not to defend her, but to confirm she was right about Riker. "We just never saw it." Margaret was found guilty of manslaughter, sentenced to 5 years with psychiatric care. She served 3. Margaret returned home in 2022 to a changed town. The greenhouse had been demolished by the city. In its place was a memorial garden planted by local students. A plaque reads, "For those who lived with unseen wounds." Detective Ramirez continued her work, pushing for better handling of historical abuse and stalking cases. Margaret Fletcher's case reminds us, when we dismiss trauma, we bury the truth with it, she told a conference of law enforcement officers. Lenny's sister, who had never met Margaret, visited her one autumn afternoon. They sat quietly under the oak tree in her backyard. "I forgive you," she whispered, "but I wish you had asked." Waverly Falls is quiet again. But stories like Margaret's remind us, beneath calm waters can lie untold storms. Justice is not always a gavel. Sometimes, it's a gun fired in fear. And sometimes, the villain in your nightmares is real, just wearing a different face. This has been The Widow of Waverly Street.